Hello, my favorite sixth grade humans. Today we are going to talk about historical timelines, which basically means we're going to be looking at the endings of years BC, AD, BCE, and CE. Some of these you might have heard of before, some of them might be new to you, so we're going to get into it right now. So here's what we've learned so far this year about timelines. At the end of last week, we started to get into it a little bit. First off, we know that timelines are used to order things in chronological order. Chronological order, as you remember, means putting things in order from oldest to most recent, right? We're trying to arrange them so that the oldest year is on the furthest left to the most recent year at the end. You can do that with years, you can do that with months, you can do that with times, but you're putting them in order from earliest to most recent. We also know that they can be single tier timelines or multiple tier timelines. Single tiers timelines are talking about a single topic, right? So if I did the life of LeBron James, that would be a single tier timeline that shows events that happened in just his life. If I compared LeBron James to Beyonce, then I have a multiple tier timeline because I'm comparing two different topics or two different people. So timelines can be both single tier or multiple tier. When I'm looking at timelines, I know that I also can find certain patterns and themes that occur within the timeline. So maybe Bobby, for example, starts his day and brushes his teeth, has breakfast, and goes to school, and that happens every day at the same time. That is considered a pattern of events, and it happens every day at the same time, or it can happen every month, every year, but patterns can start to evolve. We can also have themes within timelines, which means if I'm looking at a timeline of someone's life and multiple events on the timeline relate to basketball, maybe basketball is a theme or a mini part of his timeline or her timeline. And then lastly, we know that we can also find cause and effect relationships with timelines. So certain events that happen earlier on a timeline might affect an event that happens later. So I kept using the example in class this week that if you were to eat 4 pizzas at 3 o'clock p.m., then at 4 o'clock p.m., you might throw up because of eating those 4 pizzas. So certain events that happen earlier in your life could affect other events that happen later in your life. So those are all the things that we have learned so far. Today, though, we want to get into BC and AD and historical timeline endings. So again, these are the two examples that we looked at earlier last week. We have the single tier, which is talking about Jeremy's day on the left. We have the multiple tier that talks about Jeremy's day versus Isabella's day on the right. And remember, this is another example of a single tier timeline. Here's an example of Abraham Lincoln. And right now, we've worked mostly with timelines that are in this current era, right? So the years that we recognize, we know that we're going to rank them to the smallest number to the biggest number. And that's not always going to be the case when we get to historical timelines. So on this one, I know that 1809 is a really old year to us. And 1865 is still an old year, but not as old as 1809. So 1809 is over here where Lincoln was born. And then over here, 1865 is when Lincoln unfortunately passed away. So these are some important events from President Lincoln's life, and we can put them on a timeline in order from the oldest thing, which is his birth, to the most recent thing, which would have been his death, right? So when we're looking at timelines, we're used to having years in the current era. However, when we get into BC and AD, sometimes those current era years will not look the same way. So let's talk about BC and AD first. These are the ones that you probably have seen more often because they have been around a lot longer. So BC and AD. So if I had a year that ended in BC, so for example, if I was talking about 1300 BC, that is going to be different than a year that ends in 1300 AD, right? So BC and AD are kind of opposites. So let's get into that a little bit. So first off, what do BC and AD stand for? BC stands for before Christ, okay? And when they're talking about Christ, they're talking about Jesus Christ, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So all of the years that happened before Jesus' birth are considered before Christ. And then I want you to think for a second, what does AD stand for? I want you to take a guess here. You're not going to lose a point for this if you get it wrong, but I want you to take a guess on what does AD stand for, because a lot of people think that AD stands for something that it doesn't. I bet a lot of you just typed in after death, and you would be wrong. I really was trying to wait for that sound effect, which may add a little bit of drama to it. But after death is not correct, and there's a reason why after death does not make sense. So if you were to say BC is before Christ and AD is after death, they believe Jesus lived to be about 33 years old. So you can't just remove that part of history, right? Because if BC is before Christ, AD is after death, then you're just taking out that entire time of Jesus' life. So you can't just do that with years, right? So AD does not actually mean after death, as many people think. AD actually means Anno Domini. Okay, say that out loud to yourself. Anno Domini. So Anno Domini is a Latin word. Pause for that for a second. Whoops. Okay, Anno Domini does not mean after death. Anno Domini translates to year of the Lord. All right, year of the Lord is what Anno Domini translates to. So when we switched over from BC to AD, that basically means that we are now in the year of the Lord according to the Christian faith. So BC means before Christ, AD means Anno Domini. So if I were to look at a timeline here, we are here, right? So you see that you are here button. That's where we are in the scope of years, right? The scope of history. We're in 2021 AD. Okay, so that is where that little balloon is marked. So let's look at a couple other events that you probably could recognize, but you might think that they're a lot older than they really are. If I was thinking about when America became an independent country, it wasn't until 1787 officially, but 1776 when the Declaration of Independence was signed. So America became an independent country right here on the timeline. Christopher Columbus discovered America or sailed and explored the Americas in 1492, which, if you're looking at the timeline here, you're like, that's not really that far away. In our brains, it is far away, but in the grand scheme of history, it's really not that far away. This whole side of the timeline is called AD. Everything that happened after the birth of Christ is considered Anno Domini or AD. So those are just a couple events that you might recognize. Again, the birth of Jesus is what separates us from BC to AD. So we are technically considered the 2021st year of our Lord or 2021 AD. Now, everything that happened to the left of that timeline is considered before Christ. That before Christ side can just keep on going because you can talk about years as much as you want to before Christ, right? So if it's 2,000 years before Christ, 10,000 years before Christ, that just keeps on going forever and ever. So if you're thinking about before Christ, an event that happened before Christ would be an example of King Tut, right? King Tut, when he ruled Egypt, happened around 1300 ish BC. So that's thousands of years ago. So if you're looking at a timeline, those are some events that might help you get a better view in your mind of what timelines actually look like. So, a couple rules with timelines. If you're looking at a year, the higher the number in BC, the older the year that actually is. So, if I was thinking about 100 BC versus 1000 BC, 1000 BC is a lot older than 100 BC because 100 years before Christ is not as old as 1000 years before Christ. Another rule would be the higher the number in AD, the more recent the year. So the higher you go up on AD, the right side of the timeline, the more recent the year. The highest we can go in AD right now is 2021 because that's our current year. So if I was comparing 300 AD versus 1000 AD. 1000 AD is going to be more recent. 300 AD is actually older than 1000 AD. So it's important to look at these rules and to keep them in mind as you keep practicing your historical timelines. So let's do a couple practices here. Choose your best answer. Make sure you look using that timeline on here to help you. Remember that balloon is where we are right now on the scope of history. Which year is older, 500 BC or 500 AD? All right, for this one, 500 BC would be on the left side of the timeline, and 500 AD would be on the right side of the timeline. So you can see that 500 BC is older than 500 AD. Next one, which year is older, 1000 BC or 1500 BC? Well, 1000 BC would be on the left side of the timeline right there, but 1500 BC is also on the left side of the timeline, but further to the left. So that means 1500 BC is older than 1000 BC. Let's try one more. 750 AD or 2000 AD? Which one's an older year? Which one happened a longer time ago? 750 would be right between 500 and 1000 AD, and 2000 was just 21 years ago, right? So obviously that green X or 750 AD is older. Okay, so that was a few practice questions with BC and AD. But you might be thinking to yourself, Oh, wait, you just talked a lot about Jesus and Christianity, and we're in school, right? We shouldn't be talking about that. And you're right. So, what if someone doesn't believe in Jesus? That is a common thought that many people across the world had thought before you did. So, if someone doesn't believe in Jesus, then we have the second set of acronyms at the end of our timeline here, at the end of our years. So, instead of saying 700 BC, I could also call that 700 BCE. And instead of calling it 2021 AD, the year that we are in right now, I could actually just call that 2021 CE. So there's a reason why we have two sets, and that's because not everybody around the world is Christian, or not everybody around the world practices Christianity or a religion. So we have now two sets of acronyms that we can put at the end of years. We have BC and AD, which we just learned about, and now we have BCE and CE. BCE stands for before the common era, before common era. So instead of saying before Christ, I could just replace that and say before common era. So if BCE means before common era, what do you think CE means? Hopefully you're thinking to yourself common era, which you'd be correct. So we are currently in the common era. We are in the 2021st year of the common era. So basically this is just another way of saying BC and AD, but this one, there's no religious meaning behind it. All right. However, you still have to look at the birth of Jesus as that middle line because we can't just change that, right? So, really, what we're looking at here on the timeline that we created, we still have that birth of Jesus line, which is that pink line that you see on your screen right now. Everything to the right of that pink line is CE, which is Common Era, and everything to the left of that is BCE. So, it's just another way of looking at it. But as far as the years go, they're going to mean the same thing in regards to history here. So, let's do a couple practices now with that. A couple rules to keep in mind as you're looking at this again. The higher the number in BCE, the older the year, just like we had with BC when we did BC versus AD. And then the other rule, the higher the number in CE, the more recent the year. Okay, so in 2021 CE is the highest we can go up right now on the CE side because that is the current year we are in. Okay, couple practices here now. Which year is older, 1000 BCE or 1000 CE? Well, 1000 BCE is on the left side of the timeline, 1000 CE is on the right side of the timeline. So we know that pink arrow is closer to where that balloon is that we are at today. Okay. So we see that 1000 BCE is an older year than 1000 CE. Another one, 1500 BCE or 2000 BCE. Which year is older? Which year happened a longer time ago? 1500 BCE would be that green X right there. 2000 BCE is also on the left side of the timeline, but further to the left, which means that 2000 BCE is actually the older year. That's almost 4,000 years ago if you're thinking about 2000 BCE. All right. I know that was a lot of information. Hopefully, this is making sense to you. We will practice again tomorrow, but here's a quick recap if you're confused a little bit. So, first off, BC stands for before Christ, AD stands for year of our Lord in English, but Anno Domini is what it translates to in Latin. BCE means before Common Era, and CE means Common Era. Remember, I could use BC and AD together, or I could use BCE and CE together. One is religious, one is not religious, but both use that birth of Christ line as the middle year of the timeline to separate the left side from the right side. Okay, another recap. Remember, we could call the timeline BC and AD. So everything to the right of the birth of Christ is AD, and everything to the left of the birth of Jesus is BC. Or I can say BCE and CE. Everything to the right is Common Era, to the right CE, and everything to the left is before Common Era, BCE. Okay, guys, hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions or if you just want a little clarification on this, feel free to send me an email. Maybe we can set up a Google Meet today, or you can feel free to ask me tomorrow in class if you are a face-to-face student, or send me an email if you are an online student. Hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday or Tuesday or whenever you're watching this video, and hope to talk to you soon.